Alrighty, in this video I'm going to be describing each of the Hashira using only one word, and pretty much the only rule I'm going to use is I don't want it to be a word that has to do with their title as a Hashira, such as like Flame Pillar, so for Rengoku I'm not going to say Fire or Blaze or something. Aside from that though, let's get into it, starting with Gyomei. Now, Gyomei was kind of a hard one for me, but I ended up landing on the word intimidating, and this is because outwardly that is pretty much what he is. He's very huge in stature, he's the most powerful of the Hashira, he has an intimidating aura because of that. On top of this, he's usually like crying, and he just has an interesting aura that I think is intimidating. Of course, once you get to know him, you know, he's pretty much like very soft and gentle, but outwardly, if I had to use a word, especially if you're a demon, he's very intimidating. Moving on now to Rengoku, it's an unsurprising one. This is definitely the easiest one for me, and I'd say passionate. Set your heart ablaze, umai, you know, all of that. He's constantly just yelling and glowing with passion. Energy for what he believes in, to fight for that, etc., etc. We all love Rengoku, and this is a huge reason because of it. Next up is Giyu, the water pillar, and I chose the word reserved, and this is another obvious one like Rengoku, except on the opposite end of the spectrum, in which Giyu is introduced as kind of an outcast to the Hashira, with even his partner in the mountain mission of season 1, Shinobu, kind of teasing him and saying none of the Hashira like him, and he just mostly stays quiet. He barely offers a response to her, and even when protecting Tanjiro and Nezuko, he stays relatively quiet and doesn't explain himself too much. This is an ongoing thing with him where he's very quiet to himself, and people misunderstand him because of that, and when he bluntly says certain things, they also misinterpret it as him being arrogant or thinking that he's above them, when in reality it's the exact opposite. And I've mentioned this in a lot of videos, but Giyu is a really interesting character because of these misconceptions people have about him. These people being the, you know, fellow Hashira and maybe Demon Slayer court members. But below that, he does feel inferior for different reasons, which is ironic because, in my opinion, I think he's the third strongest Hashira. You could check out my Hashira ranked if you want to hear about that. But for Giyu, I'd say reserved, and that's that, yeah. Next up is Muichiro, the Mist Pillar, and for him I chose the word detached because that's largely what he seems to be in everything we've seen of him so far. We're about to get a lot more in the Swordsmith Village arc, but without spoiling anything in that, when he hears the news of Rengoku's death, for example, he seems the most unfazed out of the Hashira, and he always seems to be getting distracted, such as when he's looking up at the clouds during the Hashira meeting in season 1 regarding Tanjiro. But this personality kind of also shifts as sometimes he shows a different side of himself, such as when he throws a rock at Tanjiro for interrupting Kaguya during that same meeting. So yeah, the word detached is what I'd use for him. Next is the flashiest of the Hashira, that being Tengen, and for this one I didn't want to use the word flashy because I feel like it'd be almost too on the nose, and a lot of these have been pretty obvious. So for Tengen, I'll use the word flamboyant, as a lot of his attacks are very showy and explosive and loud, and that being said, he is the sound breathing Hashira for a reason, him creating that himself out of thunder breathing, I believe. Tengen's a super flashy and explosive dude, very showy and flamboyant, and that sums him up pretty well. Next is Sanemi, and for him, I'm just going to quickly say hot-headed. That pretty much describes his character completely. Because of his broken past and traumas, he just becomes very hot-headed and aggressive. And on to the next one, which is Obanai. Now, I'm tempted to use the word underutilized, which has nothing to do with his personality here, because he's the least utilized Hashira in the story of Demon Slayer, and I wish we saw more of him. But if I do have to pick a word that actually describes him more so personality-wise, I would use the word arrogant, as we do see these flares of arrogance in his character overall, him saying to Tengen, especially after Tengen and Co defeated Upper Moon 6, saying like, oh, it took all this to defeat him, and kind of alluding to the fact that had he gotten there earlier, things would have gone down different. So he seems very confident or overconfident in his own abilities, and that's why if I had to use a word, I'd use the word arrogant for him. Next up, for Shinobu, the insect pillar, I'm going to use the word illusory, and this is because much of what she shows is an illusion. It's not her true personality. She kind of does this weird, overly jovial, joyful personality, which is not her true intent, as she's very angry and has much hatred towards demons and what happened to her older sister. She kind of just adopted this personality as a means of coping or not boiling over with anger, but Tanjiro sniffs this out and senses this and talks to her about it in season 1 of the anime. So yeah, that's why I chose this word. And last but definitely not least, least is the love pillar Mitsuri, who, like Muichiro, we're about to see a lot of in the Swordsmith Village arc. For her, I chose the, again, somewhat obvious word cheerful, as she's always cheering on her fellow Hashira and people who she cares about. She's very kind, caring, and that pretty much sums up her character. It's just executed very well in the story, and she's a really cool presence, very joyful character. And yeah, that's it for this video. If you did enjoy, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.